Welcome to Forum 360, our global outlook with a local view. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today, with our Zoom edition. From the minute I picked up Single-Handed, the Teddy Tibor Rubin story, I was hooked. So hooked. Was it the story? Was it the writing? I didn't know. I Googled the author, and here I am today with the author, Daniel M. Cohen. In the first pages of Single-Handed, our guest today writes, Tibor Teddy Rubin had told a reporter in regards to his upcoming Medal of Honor ceremony that what he wanted most of all was for everyone to know there was a little greenhorn, a little schmuck from Hungary, who had fought for his beloved country. Daniel Cohen, you just about had me at hello. I was further fascinated to find out that our guest today was not just an author. He currently has 2 movies on Amazon, has been a journalist, written screenplays, and directed movies. I must tell you that your book, Single-Handed, was read by a book club in Tucson, Arizona. My sister introduced me to the book, and you have a rabid fan base in the desert. We are thrilled to welcome a little bit of Hollywood to Forum 360. Welcome, Daniel M. Cohen.
Well, I'm not really a little bit of a Hollywood, but I appreciate that. I'm an indie filmmaker and an indie writer. But I will say this: I love Tucson. I've been there several times. I think
They
it's
love you.
I think it's a terrific town. It's if you're going to live in the Southwest, you could do a lot worse than Tucson. It's a cool place.
Well, they love you in Tucson. And to us in Ohio, if you are in Santa Monica, that's Hollywood. You have to understand that everything is Hollywood to us.
I know, except I've made this. I'm working on my 5th movie now, and I've made none of them. I made them in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Bend, Oregon, but I've made nothing in California, nor do I have any intention.
Well, I first want to ask you, I think many of us know the story of Schindler's List and how it came to be with the chance meeting with Spielberg in the store in Beverly Hills. From all the stories in the world, what compelled you to write this story of Tibor Teddy Rubin?
Well, I think all of these things are sophisticated accidents. Actually, a rabbi approached me back in 2000, and I was it 11, I think. He wanted to introduce me to this guy who lived 45 minutes from me, fortunately. And the story he told about his heroism was, to say the least, the hard to believe. Now, I was the last person in the world to write this book because I have a checkered military career myself, not any kind of warrior, and I don't. War movies make me. I can sit to a horror movie. I mean, my latest movie is kind of a horror thriller, but I don't like war, and I don't like war movies. And the more effective they are, the more disturbing. Like Private Ryan, and the thing Mel Gibson made recently about that surgeon who was a pacifist. There, and Clint Eastwood's great movie about the Japanese in World War II. I go to see them, but they're very disturbing to me because I really don't like war. So I approached it with a degree of trepidation. But at the same time, do you want me to talk about meeting Teddy at this point?
I was just going to ask you, I was infatuated with the book, but I can't separate whether it was Teddy or how you wrote about him. So how did you feel about him?
Oh, well, first of all, it's probably largely Teddy. And if whatever achievement it is, and now I've been writing for a long time, so I'm not an amateur, okay? But the thing that I did, and then we'll get off this, is I managed to make his life coherent. Up till then, his stories of his heroism and his character were anecdotal. And of course, the medal ritualized that and made him a personality. And he did a lot of touring after that for years. But really, it's Teddy. He is a 1 in a million, and he compelled me to write the book. I didn't have any interest in it on its face until I met the guy, and he knocked me out.
So what is something, I mean, the book is quite extensive, but I'm sure that there have to be some things that you didn't or weren't able to include in the book. What is something that you learned about Teddy that was not in the book?
Well, not much. I mean, honestly, uh, the book, my wife is an editor, which gave me the advantage of I showed her the material as we were, as I wrote it. But the more important thing is I spent a year and a half, 3 days a week at Teddy's house talking to him about what he did. And he had decided at this point in his life, I think he was 84 when I met him or close to it, that he no longer had the energy to travel around to events, to give talks, and basically do what thing he enjoyed the most, which is kind of entertain people because he's a really funny character. Um, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The question was
Is there
again, did I
anything
answer?
that you can think of
Oh,
that
that I
you
didn't put
learned
in the book.
that didn't include?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was one incident the editor asked me to take out, and I'm sorry. I just did it because they were so good about the rest of the book. I mean, they let me put all the pictures in I wanted, and they didn't. The editing was really minimal. It was mainly grammatical. Yeah, there was an incident. There was a period when Teddy was released from his many tribulations at the age of I think 23 and 19. Was it 1953 when he got out when he was released from the prison camp in Korea? He had a very brief but a very telling affair with a woman whose husband was lost was lost in missing in action. He was a pilot, and his plane was downed, and she was older than Teddy, and it was I thought a very telling incident about their relationship. She used to come to the hospital to talk to people like him because she was interested in what happened to her husband because it's in the 50s. This war so far away and so exotic and unusual, many of our casualties were never accounted for until years afterwards. So they began a brief affair, and I thought it was quite poignant because when she found out that her husband, they did recover his remains, she immediately she ended the affair, and I thought that was interesting. But I was glad to accommodate the editor who was somewhat uncomfortable with it, and that's about all, honestly. I
Well,
think that you're hearing from Teddy's mouth the unadulterated reality of his life.
well, that leads me to this question. Between your hours with Teddy and you interviewing, people that served with him, I learned a lot about the Korean War, which I had no idea about. But how could you trust the memories of these 80-some-year-olds in recounting their stories?
Well, I think that assumption is based on the idea that all people of a certain age or people get to a certain age and their memory suffers, and I don't think that's altogether true. I can remember the more vivid things that happened to me when I was younger. Some I don't, of course, but I think being in a prison camp or being shot down or being in these battles uh, leaves a sort of impression. Now, at the same time, I understand what you're saying, and I was able to interview several sources, and that I hadn't expected when I began the job. Basically took on the story to tell, and Teddy introduced me to people that he talked to on the phone all the time, and he'd leave. In the afternoon, we'd be talking, and he'd get a phone call, and he'd be gone for 20 minutes, and he'd come back, and he'd say, "Oh, that was my friend, da da da," and I'd say, "Who was that?" He said, "Oh, he was with me in the prison camp," and I'd go, "I want to talk to him." I mean, there were even a couple people who'd been in Mauthausen. Hard to believe the German prison camp where Teddy was incarcerated as a 14-year-old or 13-year-old. So how do you know? Well, you look at documents, you look at the letters that were written. I had a whole sheaf this thick of letters guys had written on his behalf, and those letters were written in the 50s. So I in the 60s. So I hardly think that their memories collectively were really that bad.
Now, eventually he's going to get the Medal of Honor, which we will talk about, but I have two Holocaust questions for you. I did my master's thesis on the Holocaust, and I've always been fascinated with it. There were people that survived and people that, that killed themselves in concentration camps that couldn't take it. Did you learn anything in your hours with Teddy? Did you learn anything about any kind of common thread of what makes a survivor?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question, best answered by scholars. And I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust because people started talking about it. They didn't talk about it right after the war. It took years for people to really get to know what happened. And I was a kid when those books were first published and those films were first shown. But okay, first of all, you learn a lot. I don't know that there's a common thread. I think some of it's luck. I think every case was probably different, or some cases, but Teddy wasn't in a death camp. 150,000 people died at Mauthausen over a period of it was established during the Spanish Civil War. The Germans, it was a multi-purpose work camp, and many people died, and those who were sent there were sent not for return, so they were expected to be worked to death. Okay, so what the reason Teddy survived, and by the way, it took me a year of talking to him before he was comfortable about that, because I think he felt a lot of guilt. I can go into why, but he was 13 years old, and the Germans didn't know what to do with the few kids they had when he was sent there. Now, in 1944, 44 became 45. A year went on. The whole the cosmetics of the camp changed, and it became a very different place, a grossly overcrowded, piles of bodies inside the fortress and outside. It's a massive fortress, understand. It's very unique and different. And why people survived? Well, some survived because they came there late in the war and the war ended. Others survived because they survived. They were quite fortunate. And Teddy survived because he was a kid and they didn't put him to work.
Now, Teddy Tibor Rubin is the only Holocaust survivor to receive the Medal of Honor, and single-handed is about this long journey of decades for him to get this honor. As you look back with a few years of perspective and objectivity, why did he struggle so long to receive this honor?
Well, it was quite evident from the get-go as to why he didn't get the medal. First of all, understand in the Korean War, when we entered, and the first major engagements occurred over the first several months, we took stunning, powerful losses. In fact, the Marines suffered their worst battle loss in the history of the Marines. And these battles were fought out behind enemy lines, what became behind enemy lines. So they had nobody knew anything. Tibor's at least three of his commanding officers were killed in action. It did not go well until many other countries joined the NATO, the UN effort, because as you know, it was not an American war. It was a war that was fought by the United Nations. It was sanctioned by the United Nations. We decided to go along with it. So why didn't he get the medal? I think it was a combination of a lot of things, but principal among them were that there was no communication. And secondly, and I think this is just as important, Teddy never said a word about his heroism from the time he came back until the age of 50, when he went to a convention which he'd never been to before, POWs, and his former staff sergeant, who was a witness to, and actually was at the front line with him, and later in the prison camp with him. His story was an amazing story in and of itself. I saw the guy and he said, "We thought you were killed. We thought you died," because he got really sick toward the end. And then the next question his guys asked, as he met several others, is, "Where's your medal? Did you ever get the Medal of Honor?" To which, of course, Teddy had never considered that.
And in a moment, I'm going to ask you one last question about that. Today, we have the honor of talking with Daniel M. Cohen, who is an author of Single-Handed, the Tibor Teddy Rubin story about his Medal of Honor. 2 movies currently on Amazon, a director, screenplay writer. I want to ask you the role of anti-Semitism in the Army, the medal. What role did anti-Semitism play, and how did Teddy feel about the decades-long fight?
Well, let's go back to the beginning. One of Teddy's challenges was that when he landed on the beach in Korea, his company was assigned a veteran, a World War II veteran with a very serious anti-Semitic streak. Although the guy, it wasn't limited to the Jews. He told his company that he had no love for Puerto Ricans or blacks, and especially Jews. And of which there were none except for Teddy. When he looked at his when he looked at his dog tags and he saw the H on it, he thought it meant Hungarian when it really meant Hebrew. So this all of this stuff, Teddy suffered at this guy's hands, and but now when you talk about the subject of anti-Semitism in the military. I think the military, and I was in the army for a relatively short period of time, is just a reflection of society. Any things that are inherently problematic in the society are reflected in the composition of the military. And I have a great respect for our military and a great respect for those who are sacrifice and who have done, who devote their lives to the military, especially, from the grunts. Okay. So it's an element, but I think too much can be made of it. And I think I brought out in the book the issues and the elements that pertain to Teddy's case, and that was a bit of an issue, but it was more the issue that so much time had gone by.
From a two last questions before we come to your movies. From a Tucson book club fan, did Teddy reveal to you more about his journey from Eastern Hungary through German occupied territory to the Swiss border? Did he talk more about that than was included in the book?
Not really. I think I got him to flesh that out over a period of time, but remember, these guys, they were Poles. He went with a bunch of a small group of Poles who had been on the road for years since Poland had been invaded, and they'd been trying to go here and there, and they'd lived this scrappy life in the rural areas. These countries have rural areas where people they walk. It's not like the Nazis are in every corner, and they are smart. They were smart about avoiding the Nazis until they got to the Italian border where they were captured. They were captured because the guards that suspected them of being Jews had told them to drop their pants and saw that they'd been circumcised. So go ahead. So I think Teddy reflections on that were as good as you could expect from a 13 or 14-year-old kid at the time.
We, outside of the West Coast, the East Coast, don't understand the complications of Hollywood, but I think anyone that has read this book wants to know why there hasn't been a movie made about it.
That's a good question. I make tiny little movies and it's way beyond me. We're talking to people about a mini series, which I think is ideal for this because this isn't just Teddy's story. He's not the only hero. There were a lot of heroes, and some of them didn't make it. And there's a guy, a priest who is a principal character who the Catholic Church's elements are trying to get him sainthood. For that, I'm not certainly not an expert on that, but why? Because movies cost a lot of money, and it has to be somebody who is very powerful who wants to do this. Now we're trying to get to those people, but it's a long struggle. It's one thing for me to go out and make a little movie like Stone in the Water with a few investors and a couple of names from TV like Bonnie and Melissa Fumero, but this is a very complicated undertaking. And if anybody out there knows somebody in a position to get this done, I invite them to contact me because we're working on this all the time.
What is one lesson that you learned from Teddy that you'd want to share with us?
Well, that lesson is something that pertains to my own life. And the reason I wrote this and I undertook it is because when I met the guy, his sense of humor was just extraordinary. He was so funny and charming that it was a pleasure. I look forward to the 3 days a week when we sat down to just chat and eat lunch and talk about, eventually talk about his life. I think I give one example in the book, or maybe maybe it isn't. At the end of the book, I talk about him and my relationship to him. But so it's coming up to the Jewish holidays, right? And I didn't know him that well. I'd maybe met with him 3 or 4 times. And just I didn't know what his level of religiosity was, and I said, "Well, the Jewish New Year's coming up. Are you preparing to do you attend shul?" And he just like this. He said to me, "No, God said I don't have to go. He already heard my story." This came out of an 83-year-old guy so fast. He took me. He I was completely disarmed by that. I laughed out loud because it was fun. And I used to be a comedian, and anybody that can make me laugh is usually pretty funny. I had so much respect for his speed. There were times when he just knocked me out. He was so quick and funny.
Well, speaking of being a comedian, you have done stand up, you have written screenplays, you have written this book, you have directed movies. Do you have a favorite part of the process?
Um, Probably it's not my favorite, but it's sort of fun to write them in a weird way. I like writing. I've always loved writing. I like creating, and I love editing. The process of making films is like pregnancy. I think it's very painful. It's not. It's uncomfortable, and I think you have to be away from it when you're making indies a few years before you attempt it again. I don't think many women who get pregnant turn
Right.
around after birth and say, let's do that again tomorrow. They have to think about it for a while and forget about how difficult and painful and how many compromises there are.
What is something that would surprise us about actors?
Um, what always surprises me about them in that I was fairly good stand-up comic, and I'm a pretty good storyteller. And I really enjoy that. But I understand that. What surprised me about actors is that it's something that some people can do and most people cannot. And I am always amazed at how good actors are, American actors. I'm always amazed at how resourceful. There to me, acting is like a magic trick. I can't do it myself, and I started as like most funny people. I started doing magic when I was a kid, but I don't know how they do it, and I don't even want to know. I'm just astonished that they can do it. So, I mean, and I've been lucky to work with some pretty good actors: Robert Forster, Donnie Wahlberg, Bess Armstrong, Adam Scott, Breckin Meyer. They were all in these little movies I made, and I have to say, every single one of them, and many actors who you don't even know, like the woman in Stone in the Water, Mary Kilpatrick, who'd never made a movie before but was a theater actor. I'm astonished at how good, resourceful, and how insightful they are as performers.
Well, now that leads me to one of my last questions. When a movie is good, is it the acting? Is it the writing? Can a good actor make up for bad writing, and can good writing cover up a less effective actor?
Well, you're asking a writer who directs, so I have a bias. I think a bad script, it's you can throw a lot of money at material, and you can throw a lot of bad lines at actors. And my first editor used to say it's the job of a good actor to read those bad lines in a good way. But I think that writing is the core. I always say a movie, the writing has a certain gravity. Every project has a gravity, and that's determined by the story and the writing and things. And I think actors come on and they bring it to life. So that's my particular bias. I don't think how many great actors have we seen in absolutely wretched movies, and they can't save them. And you can direct the living daylights out of them, but only a brilliant director like a Martin Scorsese or Alfred Hitchcock could turn bad material good, and they generally avoid bad material. That's why they're so good. They work on the material until it's very good. And that's, a good director either doesn't do bad stuff or works on it until it's a lot better.
Now, you currently, my last question, and we have about 30 seconds. You have two movies currently on Amazon. I've seen A Stone in the Water. Is it different, any different directing a well-known actor than a less well-known actor?
It depends on where you are in your career. If an actor is strong when you're not, he'll tend to protect himself that's a complicated question, but I've been very fortunate. Even though actors and I have scuffed a tiny bit from time to time, that doesn't show up on screen. And I don't. By the way, I only have one on Amazon currently. One will be coming next year. A film I made years ago. I don't know where it'll be out somewhere. Diamond Men, which is almost not available. This is a Robert Forster, Donnie Wahlberg movie. The other movie, Corporate Affairs, is MGM picked it up. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I made it several years ago.
I'm
And,
going
and
to
I'm
ask. I'm going
Go
to
ahead.
ask you in about 3 words. Tell us about A Stone in the Water. My last question.
Oh, it's a thriller about 2 women who should never meet. One of them's pregnant. And you can take it from there.
And it's a great watch. It's a
Good.
great watch.
Glad you enjoyed it. It's just a roller coaster ride for adults.
Yes, it is. I don't really have a bucket list, but if I did, today would be at the top of my list. I loved every word of Single-Handed, and I thank our guest today, Daniel M. Cohen, for sharing a little of Hollywood with us, even if he doesn't think it's Hollywood. It is to us.
Thanks a lot. I
The next
appreciate
time
it.
you pick up a book, watch a movie, perhaps you will think about our show today, pulling back the curtain just a little on the end result we see and enjoy every day. I'm Leslie Ungar. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360, our global outlook with a local view. And thank you, Daniel M. Cohen, for joining us today.
And thank you, Leslie, for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.